In the 1700s, British mariner Robert Jenkins supposedly took his severed ear into British Parliament and used it as part of his testimony, explaining how the Spanish Coast Guard had severed his ear because he was accused of smuggling. That testimony supposedly persuaded the British Parliament to go to war with Spain, which subsequently became the crazy War of Jenkins' Ear. Why am I telling you this? Well, we know that history is littered with lots of stories of war and reasons to persuade ourselves and each other to go to war. But I don't want to just talk about the war out there. I actually want to talk about the war in here and how we can go about in 3 steps to reduce the internal conflict that we have even before conflict shows up in our external world. Stay tuned. Hi guys, Calvin again. So the War of Jenkins' Ear, as preposterous as it sounds, is just one story of innumerable wars that have been told over the history of mankind, at least recorded history anyway, whether that's been passed down in textbooks in schools, through fables and storytelling. Whichever way we've been, introduced to these stories of war, there is another type of war that I want to share with you, how we can reduce the chances of conflict. And I'm not talking about the war out there, I'm talking about the war in here, the war in our heads. If we can't stop that completely, at least we can reduce the severity or the scale of the conflict that resides inside of us from time to time, right? I was talking to someone recently about major conflict and tension around indecision about what to do with their life, around how they should resolve a conflict in their relationship, about how they should resolve whatever this barrier or situation is, and that often is fueled by fear, apprehension, anger, hatred, all kinds of noise of self-judgment going on inside, which is fueling the internal war. So 3 things just quickly that I think are helpful to help us at least reduce the severity of that internal conflict. 1. Change the language that you use. If we can change the language we use, we can influence the way other people in our environment feel, but especially we can influence how we feel. It helps to maybe change our perspectives away from destructive behaviors to something more constructive. Now I'll give you a typical example. One thing I like to say is that the ego is not your enemy. The ego is your friend. I find it helpful to frame it linguistically in that way, because then it doesn't set us up for an internal conflict thinking that there's something inside of us to destroy. We've often heard, you may not have heard of this kind of terminology before, but it's quite common parlance nowadays. The ego is the enemy, it is something we should destroy, and we've heard of such terms like ego destruction. I think ego destruction is quite unhelpful, because in order to exist, we need to have this ego there. I think most experts out there in psychology, even spiritual teachers would probably say, well, actually, the ego doesn't actually disappear. So the ego cannot be destroyed, really, in the true sense of the word. Maybe some may argue with that and take a different view, but it's my opinion that going after ego destruction as a label is not quite helpful. Another bit of terminology is not helpful just on the topic of the ego is ego disintegration. Less destructive as destruction, but also, I mean, does the ego really disintegrate? Maybe it does, but I've personally found one way of labeling that process more helpful by changing the language. I prefer to call that ego transcendence. When something disintegrates, of course, it breaks down into parts. When something is destroyed, of course, it's totally gone. But if something is transcended, we are moving beyond the limits of that thing. We can transcend barriers, we could transcend obstacles, and likewise we can transcend the ego. And I think what it essentially says is we move beyond the limits of the ego but the ego still exists. So I like to say that actually the ego is your friend. We're going to take this on a ride of our lives, and we're going to work with that existence in harmony. So this is an example of how we can sort of change the language that we use and the way we frame certain things in our lives to reduce some of that internal conflict. The second thing is accept. Accept. There is a nice spaciousness that opens up inside of us if we accept what is present for us at any given time. There is no need to push all of those things that we perceive undesirable away for fear of experiencing them. Likewise, there's no need to chase any pleasant or wonderful experience either, because they're two sides of the same coin. They are both afflictions of the same curse, if you want to call it a curse. But, you know, wanting something so much or running away from something so much. And this is why one of the most famous poems from Rumi, which is actually used in mindfulness, really addresses this. I think really encapsulates the principle of existence. And here's how the poem goes. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows, who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing, and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So you see, when we accept all that's present for us, then we actually say to ourselves, it's okay where I am right now. Even that is temporary. It is okay if I'm not okay to be not okay. And it's also okay if I'm okay. Of course. So it is about some acceptance, bringing that degree of acceptance to where we are now and whatever is present at this moment, and remind ourselves it's actually fine to be where we are. It's part of the human experience after all. And finally, I want to talk about letting go. My favorite, most powerful, I suppose, tool in the toolbox. But not just letting go, deciding to let go. Once we make that decision, I want to let this go, there's a power that comes with that intentionality. You know, there is the I don't know, what is it that makes a wave come to shore? The wave, of course, is the manifestation of some other power that's allowing that wave to be. And likewise, I see that the intentionality, the decision to let go will fuel the motion of actually letting go. And once we do those three things, and that is changing the language we use, that is accepting what is present for us right now, and that is choosing or deciding to let go, then I think that we are one step closer to reducing the conflict that resides inside of us. And if we can reduce the war that is arising inside, then of course we can reduce the war that manifests outside. So no more Jenkins Air. Bye for now. Thank you again for watching my video. Why not get your own copy of my ebook, An Unfinished Mosaic, Life Lessons from a New Perspective? Click in the link below for inspiring true stories of how you can change your perspective.